Welcome. Thank you for tuning to NeptuneKnives. Upgrading to having something Waterjet cut is a bigger step. I would say that financially speaking, it's not necessarily that it's more expensive. I guess it depends on what your focus is. For example, let's see, two plates of this, and then one of these down here, this little, and that plate back there cost me about $300, $320 plus gas and time to Waterjet cut. And I think in some ways you may consider doing Waterjet cutting because you're trying to save money or save time. And that definitely is an aspect, money and time, right? The labor involved, and it does shift then your priorities. If you're able to have them Waterjet cut, then you can apply more time to providing perhaps a more artistic product. You can do more of the embellishment. You can perhaps focus on handle scales. There's that aspect. But another thing I want people to consider and think about is also the precision, and also then the resourcefulness, in a sense of it's more like an eco-friendliness. So for example, on this karambit that I've been working on for now, I don't know, close to over a year and a half, and this is finally where I'm at, and this is finally what I'm content with. To hand do this shape would waste a lot of metal. I'd be grinding away all of this stuff, basically. Everything down here you would see, all this would have to be ground away. Perhaps I could salvage that portion right there, and somewhere down the road utilize or something. Perhaps I could, to be honest, that with the saw, the whole saws would eat up. These would just become little circular discs. This portion would have to be ground away. All this would be ground away. And it's just a loss of a lot of metal. And I think when it comes to then perhaps an environmentally conscious person, you don't want to be wasteful like that. And the metal's worth something. It's nice quality stuff. I mean, you don't want to just like literally throw it all away. So I think for individuals, that's a consideration, that if you have a couple of designs, or you want to make more than one, and it's kind of like you want to be a little bit conscious of the environment and more efficient with the materials and not wasteful, then that is one reason why you could shift towards having some knives made by Waterjet. The second reason would be then precision. For example, on a small knife, when I considered the credit card knife, I did the first few by hand, and each one, honestly, of course, is slight variations. And as I would hold them and give them to different individuals, I felt like there was this one I made that was just perfect. So being that it was a credit card knife, I can't go beyond the dimensions of a credit card. So for example, if I hand do it and perhaps one thing shifts just a little bit, the hole or something else, and I lose basically maybe a millimeter or two over here, a millimeter or two off the blade, it won't matter if it's a large knife. But when it comes to something small where I'm trying to maximize the grip area, I want the handle to be as much as possible. And that's something to consider, because if you have a design in mind and something like this, and where you want it to be precise, you want it to have the maximum effectiveness, like to utilize the dimensions to the maximum potential, then perhaps Waterjet cutting, for example, for me, I like making the arbiters by hand, but when it comes to this then design, I would rather have the maximum potential. I'd rather have that if someone buys this knife, they're not losing a little bit of palm grip, they're not losing a little bit of finger choil here. I want them to have the maximum for everything, so that they're getting the most out of this dimension, this little limitation of space. Another thing then to consider about Waterjet cutting is that you can do things that you typically can't do, obviously, with certain home tools. So for example, this hole right here is 0.9 of 1 inch. Rather than having a 7/8 inch hole saw or a 1 inch hole saw, this allows me to kind of be right there. It's a measurement that's more customized. And so in the same way, if you as an individual have an idea in mind that you made something, for example, by hand, and you know that would be perfect, but you can't accomplish that perhaps with the tools you have, then the Waterjet kind of opens up the world of possibilities, because now you can skeletonize it similar to an EC Azula. You can do other ideas, and that is exciting and something to consider when you look at Waterjet cutting. It isn't just shifting towards saving money and time and producing more numbers. is an opportunity to utilize the traits of waterjet cutting, the advantages of it, the advantage of being more eco-friendly and maximizing, the metal not being wasteful, to also, of course, doing custom patterns, custom shapes and cuts that you normally couldn't do, that perhaps provide a new function or more comfort or more capability. And then also the idea of having it be more consistent, something that you could have more potential in design. You can keep that potential and not lose anything due to hand error. And then the final consideration for waterjet cutting is, machine made, it sounds great, but to some degree, even if it's machine made, there is still slight imperfection. Definitely less imperfection with high quality precision machinery, and if someone has access to that, that's awesome. But in most cases, I would say waterjet, for example, does have one flaw that I noticed, and it's something to consider if you decide to go that route. This design here was waterjet cut by the machine shop that I work with now. And there's a flaw to this, and I'll show it. But then this here was waterjet cut obviously by a large machine shop, Brass Blades, and it still has the same flaw. And it's not a flaw of the machine shop. It's not necessarily a flaw of the individual, neither my machine shop or Mr. Browse's. It's a limitation to the waterjet cutting machine. I see it on United Cutlery karambits. I see it on obviously this and this. It's prevalent, and even the place I get my knives laser engraved, they're familiar with this. So you can see here, when I start cleaning the original SK1, you can see what that portion right there is, that little haze. That is actually the waterjet marks from it being cut. This is me polishing, using the belt grinder, placing it flat on the tool rest, and you can see here the grind lines from the fine grit belt, and you can see it didn't contact this little kind of rough portion. And that's because in that repeats, you can see here even at the tip, and that is because when the waterjet machine cuts, you can see it's a slight slant. You can see here on the jimping, it's not perfectly, they're not perfect, they get wider towards the top. You see here, you can see that very clear right there. It's the same slanted. You see slanted, and it goes all the way around because the waterjet machine cuts it kind of at that, you see in this one right there, that kind of angle. And it's something that if you're thinking about getting waterjet cut, it's something to keep in mind, that I don't want you to make the investment. You make a large investment and then you get these knives and you're like, hey, and you think perhaps it's not so much that you can't fix that. That is easy enough to straighten around and get everything perfectly 90 degrees. But it's more that you may have designed it and you thought certain things would be perfect and they weren't. So for example, let's say you had screws you were thinking of using, or a titanium rod that you want to use for pins, okay? And you measure them precisely, 0.0 whatever, and you are 3/16 exact, and you send this design to a waterjet cutter, and they cut the holes for you, but they're not precise, and then you end up with just kind of almost a semi-disaster basically. And I just don't want anyone to that to happen to anybody. You're going to probably have to go and invest in a reamer bit, a high quality precision bit that will clean the hole and make that perfect size. And so you want to perhaps have the waterjet cutter cut the hole slightly smaller than what you intend it to be. But if these holes, for example, are not meant for handle scales, they're just meant for paracord, then that's not really so much an issue. It doesn't really matter. I've seen knives, actually quite a few production knives where all this is left rough and this waterjet texture is still there, and perhaps even I've thought of it like, this texture is great. It's basically like a sandy kind of, it's very grippy already. So in one way we have, people like you and me, knife people, who we want that perfect precision, and we're going to look at that and say, hey, look, that's not precise, perfect line right there. But on the flip side, perhaps someone functional, someone who's using it as a tool, is going to want to keep this texture because that is great. It does have a very rough, coarse feeling, and it provides a lot of traction. I don't think either way is bad. I think if a knife maker or person wants to get perfectly, precision holes, have everything look beautiful and clean, they can go in there and clean it all up, and that's great. But if someone wants it to be perhaps just more functional, just perhaps more cost effective, time effective, and they want to leave that coarse texture, they don't really think it's important that it has perfectly 90-degree, I guess you could say side edges. That's totally fine. I mean, it's just, we all love knives, but we have different reasons for collecting and buying them. Those are many things to consider, and I hope you found this video helpful. As always, if you have any questions, you need anything, you can email me at NeptuneKnives@gmail.com. Look forward to more videos on tactile knife discussions, 7-point reviews, knife making, and also self-defense videos, whatever I can do to contribute.